Hi, I'm Gail Banaks.
And I'm Ilana Santone. Welcome to the She Means Business podcast. Throughout our careers, we faced countless questions and sought advice from other women we respect and admire. And that's exactly what this show is about.
Each week, we aim to help you achieve your goals by sharing our experiences and talking with successful leaders, offering real stories, practical advice, and actionable takeaways for women who mean business. All right, let's do this. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the She Means Business podcast. We are so thrilled to welcome Alexandra Horwood today. You don't have to spend 5 minutes with her to see how smart and worldly and interesting and brilliant she is. Alexandra is a chartered investment manager at Richardson Wealth, one of the leading independent wealth management firms in Canada. She was ranked one of Canada's top wealth advisors by the Globe and Mail Report on Business and named Canadian Advisor of the Year at the Wealth Professional Awards. She is one of the leading investment managers and portfolio advisors at Richardson Wealth, and she is the number one female advisor in the company. She's regularly featured as an author contributor for the Globe and Mail and Financial Post. She's a mom of 2 very young kids and a very impressive chef. Welcome to the show, Alexandra. Hi.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a huge fan of your podcast and of you too. I've listened to every episode, so I'm just thrilled and honored to be here today.
We're so happy that you're here. Okay, so we want to do something a little bit different today on the show because you really are a subject matter expert, and we really want to hear kind of your advice, your professional recommendations when it comes to money, which women don't nearly get enough education on. I think nobody does, but especially women. But before we do that, we want to hear your story and how you got to where you are, how you got into financial services. And so please tell us your story.
Absolutely. So in high school and even growing up, I always loved and was fairly advanced, I would say, at math as a subject. And I remember in grade 4, we were learning about fractions and I kept raising my hand and my teacher actually had to pull me aside and say, could you please not answer every question because the other kids need another chance? And I said, well, I just love fractions. And I did Kumon all growing up. And then through school, I was really loved business. And I even stay in touch with my grade 10 business teacher, Mr. Goldberg. He assigned a project that was a financial planning project. It was for extra credit in grade 10. And I went home and I did it. And I remember my parents helped and I submitted it and he asked to see me after class. And I thought I was in trouble. And Mr. Goldberg said, I just wanted to let you know that was the best submission I've ever seen to this project in my entire career. And wow. I think that you might actually have a future in financial planning if that's something that you'd like to pursue. So I ended up going to University of Waterloo and studying business there. And I was in their co-op stream because I've also always had just this love of working and entrepreneurship. I've always worked my whole life and had little side hustles on my own business. And so I had gotten a number of co-ops while I was at university. My first one was at BlackBerry, back when everyone had one, back when BlackBerry at the time was called Research in Motion, was the largest company in Canada by market cap. It had dethroned the Royal Bank that year. And then my second co-op was at PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the largest consulting firms in the world. Then I went back to BlackBerry for my third co-op. I did an exchange in Sydney, Australia between, which was fabulous. Wow. And then I was hired for my fourth co-op at Microsoft as a business analyst. And Microsoft asked me to stay on after I graduated. And so I had an extended work experience there. And then I wanted to backpack through Europe. I figured that was the only time that I was going to be able to do that. And so I left Microsoft, went backpacking through Europe. And then when I got back, I started as an assistant at Richardson Wealth. That was 14 years ago.
Wow.
And within 3 months, I was completely hooked. I knew I want to be an investment advisor. I absolutely love it here. How do I become an investment advisor? And ultimately through failing hundreds of times and being rejected over and over and over, I was able to get some traction starting to work with some successful mining executives. And I went to PDAC, which is the largest mining convention in the world. It's hosted in Toronto each year. There's 30,000 delegates that come to Toronto for this convention. And I went there and I was just, meeting people and getting as many business cards as I could. And then our head of tax and estate planning, his name is Mike George. He is actually the Richardson family's personal tax advisor. And if you don't know the Richardson family, they're the fifth or sixth wealthiest family in Canada. They're the sixth generation family business, which is very, very rare because there's a saying shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. They've managed to continue this family business for many, many generations. So they're quite a remarkable family. And he saw something special in me and he said, how about this? He said, why don't you schedule some meetings and I will sit in on those meetings. I'll take the lead, provide the tax guidance. You just set them up, you be there, you learn, you follow up, and you follow through. And just like that, all of these mining executives started signing up with me, becoming my clients. And then it just built and grew, and then the niche grew from there. And that was probably 12 or 13 years ago. And now I've been with the firm for 14 years, and I'm now the second largest investment advisor in the firm. And I've been entrusted with over $600 million in assets that I manage on behalf of 250 families. And I love this business. It is my passion, my calling. It's so personally rewarding. It can be very stressful at times, but it is one of the most rewarding things.
What do you think that you do? You're obviously very successful at it. So what do you think that you do that makes you amazing, great at this? Other than that you love it.
There's this one quote by Theodore Roosevelt, and he said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think a lot of people in the financial services industry are often maybe looking out for what's best for them and trying to grow and focusing on themselves. And I've always been focused on what can I do and give to other people to make other people successful, to pour out my energy and my thought process and my care and my follow through and all this work to work for other people. And my dad would always tell me growing up, he's Australian, he would say, life is like a boomerang, and what you put out there, it comes back to you in different ways. So I was always raised with that mentality to work hard, always do right by other people, care about other people, be thoughtful, remember as much as you can about them, about what's important to them. And there was another saying that I just read about in a book I'm reading called Likeable Badass. And they said one of the best ways to move up in your career is to swallow someone else's frog.
Ooh.
And I don't know if you're familiar with that expression,
what's that mean?
Swallow a frog. Okay. There's an expression, it's swallow your frog. And that means whatever's on your to-do list for the day that you really don't want to do. Your least favorite thing on your to-do list, that's your frog. And what you should do is you should swallow your frog first. Get it over with. But if you want to move up and you want to shine, you got to find out maybe what your boss's frog is, what your colleague's frog is. Find out what it is and say, I'm going to swallow your frog for you. I'm going to take that thing that you hate, that you don't want to do. I'm going to take it off your plate and I will do it. And that's a really, really good strategy that I've always used in my career, is finding out what makes people tick and what people maybe really don't want to do or been putting off or procrastinating, and say, okay, we're going to do that thing first and I'm going to run with it. And then I think that makes people just feel really light and there's a weight off their chest. And they think, okay, she's willing to get her hands dirty, do the hard work that others might not be able to do or willing to do or want to do at all.
That's great. So I know Gail mentioned that you're the top female advisor in the company. I can't imagine there's that many of you at the company itself, is there?
That is a good point. So wealth management is a very male-dominated industry. So actually, statistically, only 12% of investment advisors are women. And I would be one of the youngest ones there as well. I'm 37 years old. And when we go on these partner roundtable trips, which are essentially reward trips, say the top 20 advisors at the firm will be there. Out of the top 23 of us are women. And their other women would be, even though they look quite young and they're very youthful and we're friends, they would be, much older than me. Right. So it is quite rare to have a young woman at this level. And there's not that many women at all. You're right.
And how does that impact you? How has that made you who you are today? How have you had to adapt to that type of environment? Because I imagine it's quite a challenging thing to do.
I think that it's probably similar to what you've both been through and what a lot of the other women on this podcast have been through. We've all worked our way up and in some instances clawed our way up to the top. And I would say it's probably similar in all of them. My firm is amazing. We have a wonderful culture, and I really don't ever feel like there's sexism or anything. We're very, very pro women at my firm and in our culture, and pro raising women up. So I don't have any of that kind of toxic masculinity around me now, but certainly on the way up, I got lots of it. Right. Lots of it. And I was raised by a mother who was extremely strong and really an alpha female who just pushed me and encouraged me. She said, sit down at that table. You go right up to the most powerful person in the room and you introduce yourself and you shake their hand and you tell them who you are. And so she said, dress the part, always look the part. And that's just how I was raised. So I don't really know anything differently.
Right. What have you ever encountered anything that has kind of set you back or kind of been a little bit of a, oh, that was different? Because I mean, I imagine when you're coached to kind of go to that most powerful person in the room or take the seat at the table, does it always go your way?
No, absolutely not. But when it doesn't, I just think it's funny and I just use it as fuel to, that pushes me and drives me harder. Sometimes people say, I heard someone say, which advisor do you work for? And I'll say, oh, I work for myself.
Right.
But they just don't know.
I heard someone the other day say, don't get discouraged, get determined. And that reminded me of what you said. I loved it too. I thought it really resonated with me. Just switching gears a little bit. You've had, obviously you're advising lots of different people. We have a lot of listeners, kind of junior, middle, or early middle career. What are the common pitfalls you've seen people make from a financial perspective as they're starting out or as they're progressing through their career? And are there any specific that kind of apply to women differently than men as you've kind of experienced that?
Absolutely. And there are a lot. I'm going to talk a little bit about women specifically, I think, just because of I'm guessing that the viewership probably appreciates that a bit more. So there are a lot of pitfalls, but I want to just take a step back and say that studies show that women have two main fears when it comes to their future. Number one, and this is regardless of how wealthy they are. Number one, women are often terrified that they're going to run out of money in their retirement, that they are going to be destitute. I had one very, very wealthy client. They had $4 or $5 million with me, 2 properties, no debt. And in March 2020, when COVID happened and the stock market crashed, she told me that she was terrified she was going to be living under the gardener eating cat food.
Oh my God.
That is a real fear that women have. And even women like Oprah and J.K. Rowling, they share that same fear. So that's a major fear that a lot of women have. The second fear, especially that mothers have, is that their children will fail to launch. So if we know going into these meetings, those are the 2 greatest fears of women, how do we address those right away? So those are 2 things that I like to encourage women to plan for, no matter where we are in the journey of the client-advisor relationship. I like to first start by saying, okay, what are your goals? Let's make a visual representation. What would you like to accomplish that will require planning, money, and time? And then we actually make a visual document that shows those goals and we work towards them together. And I would say starting out or moderately, one thing that I sometimes see as well, and it certainly has changed a lot over the years, but a lot of women don't want to be involved in the discussions about their finances. And for me, the kiss of death is when I hear, oh, my husband handles that.
Yeah. You actually brought up an interesting question in my mind. Even when it comes to a couple managing their finances together, and I have a lot of friends who I have a lot of friends who have their husbands manage the money, and we yell at them and say, as a group, and we yell at them and say, no, you need to know what's going on with your money. I also know a lot of people who keep their finances very separate. So Absolutely. I have a couple of questions. So one is, would you advise that? Would you advise women to kind of keep their finances separate from their husbands or partners? Like, is that a better approach, or is mixing it all together better?
That's a good question, Gail. And I would say that over the years, I would say that the younger generation is more likely to keep things separate. Whereas if you look at, say the baby boomers, for example, most of them have everything joint and combined. So I think there is a demographic shift, and possibly maybe, that group, maybe, the wife wasn't working. And maybe now with younger generations, it's much more common for both spouses to work. So women have a bit more financial independence and they think, no, I want to have my own bank account. I don't want to have any judgment if I want to buy a really nice pair of boots. I don't want to have to ask for permission or explain that away. So I think that whatever works for you and your family is the right way to go. But I do think even if you are separating your finances, it is very important to have open discussions and communication, especially if you have kids, because it is a family. There are family needs and goals. And perhaps one spouse is a really high income earner and one is not. Or perhaps, someone takes a leave of absence from work. You need to have those conversations and make sure that it's really transparent. And sometimes you have to have those really tough conversations to make progress. And I don't want anyone to think, if we got in an argument about money, that's bad. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe you needed to have that conversation so that you could swallow the frog and clear the air so that you can get to a place in your relationship where you both feel comfortable. So it really does. I would say it's a good question. I would say there's no right or wrong answer. It's just about what you're most comfortable with. But I definitely recommend having those conversations regularly and openly.
So let's talk specifically about women. And even though I think, our listeners are younger, I think it's never too early to start thinking about retirement and retirement planning. Mm-hmm. What specifically should women think about when it comes to retirement? Is it different than men? Because I've heard, women live longer. They maybe retirement, God knows what that is. Like, what should women think about when it comes to retirement planning?
I think that when you think about retirement, what does retirement mean to you? Because I think that retirement has morphed and it's shifted, and it's not so much, I worked 30 years at the same company and then I retire with a pension and a gold watch and sail into the sunset. I think that a lot of people still want to continue their careers in different ways. Maybe it's consulting, maybe it's being on a board of directors, maybe it's volunteering. You're going to have a lot of time. How are you going to allocate that time so you still feel mentally stimulated, you still feel valuable, you still feel productive? Perhaps if you're retired, you might have, kids who are still living at home, or you want to support them, or you want to help them with the down payment on the home, or you want to contribute to your grandkids' education savings plan. So I think that what we typically see is in the first few years of retirement, we call those the honeymoon years. So that's when most people are traveling and doing all of the bucket list items that they've wanted to do. And we often find those years are more expensive for a lot of people. And one thing too that a lot of people need to factor in, and I find it's on the top of women's minds, is budgeting in care in the later years of life. It is expensive to live in a retirement home or community, to have in-home care, to stay, if you want to stay in your home as long as possible, which most women do. It's expensive. So planning ahead for care, for all of the fabulous things you want to do in your retirement. And certainly women do statistically live longer than men. And we are living longer with all of these health advancements that we're seeing too. People are living longer, healthier lives. And then not just from a financial perspective, I think from a health and wellness perspective, we really have to take care of ourselves. You've probably heard people say, when they're doing something really kind of bad for them, I don't want to live a long life anyways, I'll just die young. But that's actually wishful thinking in a way, because you're not going to probably die young. You're actually probably going to spend the last 10 to 15 years of your life quite sick.
Sick, yeah. Sick
and exactly. And who wants to do that? So investing in our health, our well-being, whether that's nutrition, exercise, sleep, and, our own mental health and our well-being too. I think that it's really, really important to make sure that we're sorting out what's going on in our minds, especially as very driven and successful women. There's a lot of pressure, right? There's a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of stuff whirling around in our heads all the time. So it's really important that we sort that out through whatever means works for you. For me, it's meditation, it's journaling. I have a gratitude journal every morning. When I wake up, I write down 3 things I'm grateful for. And whether it's spiritual or stretching or yoga, whatever that looks like, I think that we have to center ourselves regularly and really, really invest in our mental health and our physical health so that we can have a productive, healthy retirement and start saving and planning and make sure ideally that debt is paid off as well by the time that you retire. You want to be debt-free, comfortable, and healthy so that you can enjoy your retirement and that time that you've worked so hard for.
I love that. I find myself thinking, like, I've never thought about retirement until very recently. I've had a couple people in my in my inner circle who have retired, and I've never thought about it until I thought about it. And then I started thinking about it a lot in terms of what I wanted out of my retirement, because I can't even imagine a time where I will retire. But so I think that notion of really thinking that through of what you want at that time is really important. I have a few just very tactical questions that I think you'd be great to answer. Like, first and foremost, when is it too early to start thinking about financials or putting money away or starting that TFSA? When do you say?
It's never too early. Technically, you cannot have a TFSA or an RSP until you're 18. So if we have clients whose kids are turning 18, we're like, okay, it's time. Let's get them in. Let's get their TFSA started. The tax-free savings account, which is a great tool for young people and people of any age to start saving with, because you put your money in, it grows tax-free. You can take it out, no penalties. It's a wonderful savings tool. It's very flexible. And then with our RSPs, registered retirement savings funds, you typically want to start contributing to those when you're earning a bit of a higher income. And the higher your income, the more of a refund or a tax deduction that you'll get for those contributions. Those are great for saving for retirement. But I say the sooner the better. And not to be intimidated, even if you're just saving a little bit, even if it's just a few $100s or $100 a month. It's getting into a routine and a habit of saving and investing. And the power of compounding and growing is huge. The younger you start,
interest, baby.
Absolutely. What was it? The eighth wonder of the world? Einstein called it. It's important. And it's just getting into that habit. It's like anything, right? If you make something a habit, ultimately, I think you'll be really successful at whatever that is that you're dedicating time to.
Okay. I work for a corporation. They're matching my contributions.
Amazing.
Do it or don't do it.
100% do it. That's something that I always advise all my clients. If you're going to get free money from your company, take it. Typically, we say you might not want to do anything over and above what gets matched. But if you're more the personality type where you just want to be hands off and you don't want to think about it, you can go really as high as you want, as long as you're adhering to the limits that you're able to contribute to those registered plans like tax-free savings accounts and RRSPs. But definitely, if you have a company or a group plan or a match, take advantage of it.
I get my bonus. Do I take it or do I put it in an RSP?
I mean, you're talking to a financial advisor, so I'm gonna go team RSP. But maybe you want to do some in your RSP, and maybe you want to do some to say your mortgage, or you are saving towards a big family trip. That's really important to you. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It could be split and segmented to achieve your unique goals, whatever those are for you.
I have one more tactical question, going back to my round of tacticals. One of the things I understand is a miss among individuals, but as you're getting older, is things like wills and powers of attorney, and just thinking about those kind of basic things. And we often think that if I don't have kids, if I don't have a house, do I really need these things? I'm curious your opinion on that.
Okay. So first of all, just say you're speaking my love language. And I'm always the one that has to bring that up. No one ever brings it up. I can't believe you just did. I feel like I've just been hit by a truck in the best possible way. So 60% of Canadians do not have a will.
That is crazy.
Wow.
Right?
The government is cleaning up.
100%. And nobody wants to talk about death. It's not sexy. Let alone paying a lawyer to talk about your death. No one wants to do it. It is the biggest frog.
I'm always like, you know what? It's for today. It's for today. And then if things change, then we change it. It's not in stone.
It's not set in stone. Absolutely. You can go back and change it as well. And a lot of people want to be charitable, or a lot of people make changes. And so as my responsibility, every time that I have an annual wealth management progress review with my clients, we actually say, okay, are your wills and your power of attorney accurately reflecting your wishes? And we have a scanned copy on file. And sometimes we'll just run through it and remind them what the will says. And then they can either sign off and say, yes, our wishes are the same, or actually, maybe we'd like to change that. But typically I find it is one of the most challenging topics to get progress on, in my experience as a financial advisor, because people do not want to talk about it or address it or swallow that frog.
I love that.
Alexandra, what advice would you give your younger self, knowing what you know now?
I know that you've asked everybody on this podcast, so I have two pieces of advice I would give myself. And it's a Sheryl Sandberg-ism. Of course, the GOAT. We all love her.
Amazing.
One of the chapters in her book is speak your truth. Speak your truth. If you feel strongly about something, speak up for yourself. And I look back on my career and my younger self, and sometimes I think, wow, where did I get the audacity to do all of the things I did? I really had guts or chutzpah. And I'm proud of myself in those moments, but there are times where I wish that I did really speak up for myself, whether that's in relationships or my career, and say, I have a problem with this. Let's discuss it, because I don't want to put it under the rug. And a lot of that goes back to the way you were raised, right? How did your parents handle conflict? That's how we saw and what we grew up with. So I wish that I had have swept less things under the rug and just head on address those things. And I do wish that earlier on in my life, I'm going to get really personal here. So I actually stopped drinking alcohol 4.5 years ago. And it has been a huge milestone in my life. And I feel like I am in much better physical shape. I sleep really, really well. I can really focus on my health and wellness and be a wonderful mom to my kids. And I have to say, looking back on my life, I wish that I did that sooner. And I think we are seeing a huge movement now. They're calling it a sobriety movement, where a lot of people are just really focusing on their health and wellness and cutting back or out on alcohol. And I think that that's one thing that was a huge, huge milestone in my life. And I think that looking back into even my teenage years, I think that having those healthy habits, focusing on your wellness, your nutrition, your sleep, regular exercise, all of those things are hugely beneficial in every single area of your life. So I think if I could go back, I would have been really focused on developing those healthy habits. And I also would have been speaking my truth and speaking up for myself a lot more than I probably did in those early years.
Love that. Thank you.
Well, Alexandra, it's been wonderful having you. We could talk for hours about this topic. It's a great topic. It's one that we don't talk about enough. It's one that's wonderful to talk about it with a lens on, what we can be doing kind of early, mid, and later in our careers to be able to manage our finances. So it's been a thrill to have you. You're so articulate and so knowledgeable in this space. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks you so much,
Alexandra.
Thanks for having me.
Well, one of my favorite topics, finances, money.
I don't know why people have such a hard time talking about money. I've never had a hard time talking about money. It must be my upbringing.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think it's probably that. And what was interesting for me is I think when I really took a keen interest in money was when I was doing my MBA. It was in the mid 2000s. I'd already had my kids, and I was like, I did my finances, but I wasn't really educated. And during my MBA, there was a personal finance course that I could take. And I took it because I was like looking for electives. It was the best, like the single biggest, best course I took in my MBA. And I took it from the start to the finish, like all 2 years.
Yeah.
That's where I learned, like, always that put your 10% away, max out your RESPs because you get a credit, max out your RSPs if your company's matching. And there was just all of these lessons I learned. I was like, oh my God, my mind has been compound interest.
Yes. Compound
all
interest.
Of this stuff.
God bless compound interest. And if you don't know what that is, go find out what compound interest is.
Google it. We'll put a link in the show notes about compound interest.
The gist is start early, even if you have nothing. It will grow and grow and grow and grow itself. The other thing I think is important to share for our listeners, if you haven't heard about a company called Willful and you need a will, oh my God, it's fantastic. So you just you go to willful.com or .ca, I don't even know. And you can get a will in minutes in minutes for very, very little money. It's like, I don't know, $100, $150. And it's done and they take everything into consideration. It's so easy. We both got ours done that way and it's just done. And I like this idea of like, if you don't talk about it and, you're not going to live any longer if you don't talk about what happens to your kids.
Totally.
It's so it's unbelievable.
I think so. I obviously she's an expert in her field. I think it's critical for everyone. But just given the stats that she shared about women in particular, hugely, hugely important to talk about. I think that fear of speaking about it is one, Gail, and I agree with you. It's one of those things like, don't get married without talking about financials.
Yep.
Talk about financials all the time.
Yep.
The great thing now is there's lots of resources that you can find, whether you have an advisor, you don't have an advisor, whether you want to manage yourself, whether you want to have someone to manage.
Yep.
But this notion of educating yourself, and even whether you manage or you support a spouse or a partner who manages, being very well aware of what your financials are and starting early.
Yep.
It's never too early. I guess maybe before you're 18, it is a bit too early. But I think that there's this value of really understanding the makeups of your financials and where you should put your money.
Absolutely. And listen, if you managed your money, unless you got married, at 18, you did manage your money. So there's no reason why it then has to, you're not involved in it anymore the minute you do get into a relationship or you get married. So I think it's important for everybody to be very well aware of their finances, and involved, because chances are your partner may die before you too, because women tend to live longer. And so you need to know before, you need to know while you're married, and you need to know after they're gone, so that you're not left high and dry. I loved what she said about the swallow the frog. Like, what a great concept. I'm trying to figure out how to just apply that in everyday life. And I think it's representative, obviously, of her attitude towards and her work ethic of just pulling up her sleeves and being willing to get down and dirty and do what it takes. And listen, she's incredibly successful, and it's not a coincidence, and it's not by accident. She's incredibly smart, incredibly hardworking. And obviously, she eats a lot of frogs. I love that. I love that saying.
Swallows a lot of frogs.
Swallows a lot of frogs.
No, and I really I think what you that and how you set your kids up for that same attitude. So obviously that was very ingrained with her through her parents, but how, each of us as parents, wherever you are, teaches our kids to be that way. And it's harder now because, we're working, our kids have access to things they never had before, we didn't have growing up. But instilling this work ethic, I mean, I personally really resonates with me, this generosity, like this swallow someone else's frog. Like what a great lesson for us to teach our kids and to have ourselves of, it's not only about me and my frogs, but it's actually about your frogs too. Yeah. And how can I help others as I go through life? That to me is something that I really value. And I think instilling that in our children is only going to make the world a better place and make them more successful over time.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. In order to swallow someone else's frog, you have to know what that frog is, which is a whole other element of, being considerate and being empathetic and going beyond yourself and thinking about how the other person is interpreting problems and, what their issues are, which, by the way, is also the secret to being a really good negotiator, because, in order to negotiate well, you have to think about what other people want and what their win-win is. Right. And so there's, ultimately a very self-serving side to this, but you end up doing some good in the process and end up helping other people, and it inevitably helps you. So a very rich lesson that I'm definitely going to write that one down.
Yeah.
And action that.
So I think big lesson, educate, act,
talk about it,
and talk about it.
Yeah.
So
love it. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks for listening to this episode of She Means Business. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and head over to our show notes where you can find helpful links and summaries of key points from the episode. We'd also love to hear from you on LinkedIn or Instagram, so please follow and DM us at the She Means Business podcast. See you next time.